And as everyone in this room knows, global economic conditions have interrupted offshore wind's progress, even as Massachusetts is on the cusp of a major project nearing completion. We're honored this morning to have Rebecca Tepper, Secretary of the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs, to kick things off. The Secretary will be followed by an industry panel that includes representatives from 3 leading wind development teams and the head of one of Massachusetts' leading environmental organizations. We have Carrie Hitt, Senior Director for Grid Policy and Strategy, Vineyard Offshore, Ken Kimmell, Vice President of Offshore Wind Development, Avangrid, Elizabeth Turnbull Henry, the President of the Environmental League of Massachusetts, and Rebecca Ullman, Director of External Affairs at SouthCoast Wind. Our moderator is Colin Young, the Deputy Editor at the State House News Service and a longtime follower of the progress of offshore wind in Massachusetts. Thanks to our sponsors for supporting this event, Avangrid, Vineyard Offshore, and SouthCoast Wind. And now it's my pleasure to welcome to the podium Rebecca Tepper, Secretary of Massachusetts Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs. Thank you so much, Secretary, for being here.
Good morning, everyone. It's nice to see so many familiar faces. I know we've all been in the trenches of offshore wind for a while now, so I'm really excited to be here on a day where we have a lot of progress to report. Thank you, George, for having me. I'm happy to be here. As we all know, we really are at a pivotal time in the clean energy transition. This summer was the hottest summer on record. I spent a good portion of my summer dealing with the floods in central Massachusetts. Whole crops just washed away. All of these impacts are here now, and we know that they are only going to get worse. So there are a lot of challenges, but there's also a lot of reasons to be very hopeful. Communities across the globe today are coming together to meet this moment, and the technologies that we need to drive emission reductions are no longer a distant dream, they are here. And Massachusetts is a state of first. You see that revolutionary spirit in response to climate change. We have climate tech startups, and we're scaling up important technologies that will lower emissions and protect communities. Colleges and training centers are deploying inclusive workforce development programs. And off the south coast of Massachusetts, we are building an offshore wind farm. As I have said before, and I'm sure many of you have heard me say it, the Healey-Driscoll administration is all in on offshore wind. Despite the challenges that we face, we are confident that we will have a vibrant offshore wind industry off the coast of Massachusetts. Our resources are simply too valuable to have that not happen. We have a shallow shelf, as you all know, and high wind speeds that are ideal for offshore wind. And we have markets that are ready to receive this abundant power. So today, we see the promise of that industry in the Vineyard Wind project that's being built right now. That project now, as you all know, now has turbines in the water, and they soon will be delivering power to New England. I remember, as I'm sure all you do as well, talking to developers after Cape Wind and thinking about whether this industry would ever get off the ground. Well, this project is proof that it's off the ground and in the water. And it's already providing benefits to Massachusetts residents. Over 900 union jobs and a robust community benefits agreement that can be used as an example for many other projects. And soon, over 400,000 homes will receive clean, affordable energy from this project. So the next chapter in our offshore wind industry is also unfolding. As you know, we issued here in Massachusetts our fourth and our largest offshore wind solicitation to date. That is an RFP that invites bids for up to 3,600 megawatts of offshore wind, which represents about 25% of our annual electricity demand in Massachusetts. So this is the largest procurement of offshore wind energy in New England's history, and it's designed particularly with flexibility to capture benefits both for customers and for developers, and to help projects manage some of the challenges that we're seeing from supply chain to inflation and to new guidance on federal funding. So we know that this industry is adapting to a rapidly changing environment, and international conflicts have driven up energy prices, and we are having issues with inflation, and supply chain issues persist. No one has said that building up this industry was going to be easy, and it turns out that it's not. But we in Massachusetts want to be a partner who helps navigate these waters, because our shared success depends on it. And that means support from the federal government. Federal tax credits are key to lowering the price of offshore wind for consumers. That's why a few months ago, Governor Healy joined with our other New England states to call for clear guidance from the Treasury Department to ensure that offshore wind facilities are fully eligible for the investment and production tax credit and bonus tax credits. The proposed rule by Treasury in November was a good start. It does make clear that offshore wind transfer power conditioning equipment is ITC eligible, but we still need further clarity on the energy community's bonus tax credit. Specifically, we need updated guidance that allows bonus tax credits to projects that locate their marshaling and O&M ports in an energy community. So we have told the federal government in numerous times and numerous ways that we need this guidance by the end of the year to allow time for developers to incorporate it into their bids in January. So on Tuesday, I was again in DC, this time making the case for building out our region's transmission system to integrate offshore wind into our regional grid. And we know that supporting offshore wind with transmission will make our grid more reliable and affordable. And we continue to work closely and urgently with our federal and state partners to make New England a hub of offshore wind. And we are taking every step we can to build a strong regional economy that supports and is supported by offshore wind. Some of these challenges, like workforce development, we can tackle here. And that is why it is a top priority in our administration. Cabinet secretaries meet regularly to develop strategies for building out our clean energy workforce. As I'm sure many of you heard, the number that we are saying that we need of new clean energy workers is 38,000. I say this all the time, and my kids are actually tired of hearing me say this, but I do believe that the heroes of the offshore wind and the energy transition are going to be the electricians, the plumbers, and the construction workers. So we are lucky in Massachusetts to have some brilliant, forward-thinking labor workers. I've been very grateful to have partnership with the IBEW, the building trades, and the AFL-CIO, who are all helping us guide this work. I think it's very notable and not an insignificant thing that the new president of the AFL-CIO counts climate jobs as one of her top priorities. You see this commitment reflected in the bold, productive training programs that are led by our unions and the groundbreaking project labor agreement forged with Vineyard Wind. Colleges and universities are also stepping up and we're building a pipeline. Students are getting exposed in high school to clean energy jobs, and they can take that inspiration to a union training facility or a program like at the National Offshore Wind Institute at the Bristol Community College. And they can head to work constructing turbines, transmission, and port infrastructure. These are new family-sustaining jobs. This administration will continue to invest in this great work. This summer, we were able to announce $18 million in clean energy workforce development grants, and there is more to come. In addition to the jobs, we are investing in infrastructure. To date, Massachusetts has invested over $180 million in our ports to prepare for offshore wind staging and deployment. Thanks to these investments, New Bedford has an active offshore wind terminal that is being used to build the Vineyard wind project. And other ports to support offshore wind construction, manufacturing, or operations in New Bedford, Salem, and Somerset are also all coming online. As we look forward to the future, we do need to make sure that additional investments are, So we are looking forward to expanding the Wind Testing Technology Center to maintain our role and expanding and developing wind technology. We also continue our advocacy on the federal level, but we also haven't lost sight of our greatest strength, which is our partnership with our regional states. I have said this in a couple of talks recently, and I do like saying it because I think it's important for people to know that the New England states are cooperating and are talking to each other, I think, like I have never seen. I think part of it is that we know each other, we've known each other for a long time, but also I think it's that the state of New England right now is such that we are all thinking in the same direction. So I think it's a very productive thing for this industry, as well as for other cooperation that we are doing with them. So as you know, we've joined with Connecticut and Rhode Island to execute a historic multi-state coordination agreement on the procurement of offshore wind. Individually, each state is seeking proposals in January for new offshore wind, and combined, that's a procurement of up to 6,000 megawatts of offshore wind. So working together through this new agreement, we can align our procurements to leverage our collective buying power, lower project cost, and maximize benefits for customers across the region. And we hope to reduce the risk for developers so that they are able to provide bids that we can buy. So this agreement allows us, So this agreement, the RFP agreement and MOU with the other states, allows us to take advantage of this unique economic development opportunities available in each state so that the developers don't have to establish every component of the supply chain separately. We hope to complement each other's strengths, and we can win with synergy. The truth is that building out offshore wind to scale that our states need and want requires a regional and interregional approach supported by our federal partners. So our team has led a coalition of 10 Northeast and Mid-Atlantic states that is working together to explore how to build out an offshore wind network. This collaboration is something new. We met for the first time a couple weeks ago live in New York. And it was a really productive meeting, and I think just having everybody in the room together really does make a difference. And we're talking a lot about different strategies. One of which sort of I think is the first priority is thinking about standardization in transmission materials. So lastly, I do want to look ahead for the next few months to our administration. So we will be receiving the RFP bids in January, and we're looking forward to reviewing those. And more broadly, we are also taking a look at siting and permitting policies throughout the Commonwealth. We brought together a new commission, and that includes developers, environmental justice communities, conservationists, and other sectors that are impacted by our siting and permitting laws. Because the fact is, we are going to need a significant amount of new infrastructure. We're also looking north to the Gulf of Maine. There's tremendous potential in the Gulf of Maine, and we've been closely collaborating with our federal leads and partners in Maine and New Hampshire in the sustainable siting of lease areas that will support our offshore wind targets. And finally, we have established an interagency offshore wind council. And this is an internal body of agencies that are coming together to draft a strategic plan for our administration's approach to offshore wind going forward. And we hope to solicit feedback on that in the months to come. So, as the governor says all the time, climate change is our greatest threat and our greatest opportunity. Offshore wind is the poster child. We're creating an industry from nothing. It's going to be hard, but I am confident that we will get there. I appreciate the effort of the many of you in this room who are making that happen. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Secretary. And now it's time for our industry panel. Would the panelists just take the stage? I think just save maybe a middle seat for the moderator. Otherwise, grab a seat that you like. So our panel, our industry panel, Carrie Hitt, Senior Director for Grid Policy and Strategy at Vineyard Offshore, Ken Kimmell, Vice President of Offshore Wind Development at Avangrid, Elizabeth Turnbull Henry, President, Environmental League of Massachusetts, and Rebecca Ullman, Director of External Affairs at SouthCoast Wind. Our moderator is Colin Young, Deputy Editor at the State House News Service. Colin, take it away.
Great. Thank you, George. Thanks, everyone, for being here. And thank you to the Secretary for her opening remarks. I think she really gave us a lot to work off of. And honestly, her remarks really addressed the first question that I wanted to get into with our panels. But first, I'm going to ask it, we sort of go down the row here and everyone introduce themselves and give the audience a bit of a sense of what you do, what your company or organization does, and how you fit into the offshore wind world. Carrie, why don't we start with you at the end?
Great. Thanks a lot. Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Secretary Tepper, for your kind of laying the groundwork for us to get started this morning. A lot of what you said we're going to cover and hopefully elaborate on really encouraging efforts that you've all been doing in the past 9 months. So, getting there. So I'm Carrie Colin Hitt. I'm Senior Director of Grid Policy and Strategy at Vineyard Offshore. Vineyard Offshore is the development arm of Copenhagen Infrastructure Partners, which is an investment fund. Vineyard Offshore, first and foremost, you might know, is co-owner of Vineyard Wind 1, the project that Secretary Tepper referred to earlier, which is soon to be interconnected and providing offshore power to the grid. So we're super excited about that, hoping to see that happen very, very soon. And as I think she mentioned, we have 6 turbines in the water, or 5, and 1's on its way. With the luck of good weather, that will continue. So in Massachusetts, our focus right now is on that project. In addition, we have other lease areas in the U.S., 2 here in the Northeast, 1 out in California, and we're developing those projects. We also recently won an award in New York to deliver 1.3 gigawatts by 2030 or 2031 with an additional offshore wind project that's called the Excelsior Project. I'm happy to talk about that. But it's similar in nature to what we're doing here. As I said, I focus on grid policy and strategy, so some of the remarks made earlier about regional transmission coordination and advancing that effort is near and dear to my heart, and really super important for offshore wind and making sure that while we build these projects, we can interconnect them. So I look forward to talking more about that.
Ken?
Good morning, everyone. I'm Ken Kimmell. I'm the Chief Development Officer at Avangrid Renewables. I'm actually a climate activist and have been for all of my career, and that is why actually I'm working in offshore wind right now. I'm very proud to be at Avangrid. We are the country's third largest renewable energy developer with a very expansive portfolio of onshore wind and solar projects across the country. We are a co-owner and joint venture of the Vineyard Wind 1 project. We're extremely proud of that. 40 monopiles are now in the seabed. 20 more have to be installed over the time. We should be, I'm sorry? 41? Okay, good to hear it.
Another one just went in.
Yeah, that's great. We picked up the pace. Thank you, Bill.
Good weather.
Bill is very close to the facts on the monopiles, closer than I am. But we'll actually be turning on the switch in 2023 and generating clean electricity. We expect about 30,000 homes in Massachusetts will get clean power from this facility this year. Next year, 400,000 homes. And I do want to highlight what Secretary Tepper said about the union jobs. We signed a historic project labor agreement with labor unions in Massachusetts. That labor agreement called for 500 union jobs to come from this. Well, we had a jobs report that's coming out today that indicates that we've already exceeded that, almost doubled it. 937 union jobs have been created. With more to come next year as we complete construction. And I just want to pause on that for a minute, because behind that statistic are human beings who are putting bread on the table for their families, and they're making history. And so this project is not just about clean energy, which is a lot to start with. It's not just about leading the nation in building the first large-scale offshore wind farm in the United States, but it's about giving workers hope and dignity and making them part of the change that we need to be part of. So we're extremely proud of that. Can't overestimate the importance of that. Right behind Vineyard Wind, that 800-megawatt project, we own a lease area which has 2 gigawatts of additional capacity, which we very much hope to develop in the coming years. The first phase of that, approximately 800 megawatts, is nearly completely permitted on the state side, and we'll be finishing up the federal permits early next year, so it's close to a shovel-ready project, so we're excited about that. And then we own a large leasehold in North Carolina and Virginia called Kitty Hawk, which is a 3.5 gigawatt leasehold, which we also hope to develop over time. So I know we're going to get into where are we at with offshore wind, but I want to start out by saying I'm actually super optimistic that we've dealt with some of the challenges. We'll talk about that more, and we're poised for more success.
So, thanks, Ken. Becky?
Great. Good morning, everyone. So nice to meet you. I'm Becky Ullman. I'm the Director of External Affairs for SouthCoast Wind. We are an offshore wind project. We're about 30 miles south of Martha's Vineyard. We won our lease area in 2018 and have been hard at work every day since developing that project. We've got a team of about 60 folks down the street, and we're very excited for the tri-state solicitation and all the good things to come.
All right, good morning, everyone. My name is Elizabeth Turnbull Henry. I'm the president of the Environmental League of Massachusetts and the ELM Action Fund. For those that don't know ELM, we are the oldest environmental advocacy organization in the Commonwealth. We were founded in 1898, and for the last 125 years, we've been advocating for solutions that meet our most pressing environmental challenges. In the early days, helped set up state forests and state parks and town forests. We also helped pass nation-leading legislation over the years to address water quality, toxics, brownfields, wetlands. In 2016, we helped shape the Energy Diversity Act, which ignited the offshore wind industry here in Massachusetts and across the country. And we led the advocacy on the 2021 Roadmap to Net Zero Law and the 2022 Clean Energy and Offshore Wind Law. In 2020, almost 4 years ago, we launched the New England for Offshore Wind Coalition, which has emerged to be one of the leading voices for the timely and responsible development of offshore wind in the region. Our goals are to drive regional collaboration across the 6 New England states, and I tell you, we cheered when we saw that tri-state solicitation because our goal is to bring offshore wind online in a timely and responsible way. I represent a big tent of environment, labor, business, academia, environmental justice, conservation groups who share the belief that offshore wind is the single biggest lever we can pull to decarbonize the New England economy.
Excellent. Great. So now that we sort of have the lay of the land up here on the panel, we're going to jump right into it. Ken mentioned some of the challenges, and the question that came to mind to me as I started thinking about how to prepare for this panel is that there's been this string of bad news for wind lately. Honestly, this week, while I was getting a lot of these questions typed up and ready to go, the New York Times published yet another article that really encapsulated a lot of the challenges. And just here in Massachusetts, you know, where, I have to do math on this, but about 7.5 years after the clean energy law that really set us down this path, and we have no power from that law delivered yet. Massachusetts can no longer claim to have the first utility-scale offshore wind farm in the country. Massachusetts is almost back to square one in terms of procurements. The next round of projects to be procured are almost certainly going to be more expensive than they would have been previously. So my question for the panel, and Carrie, we'll start with you again, is what are the reasons, are there reasons, and what are they, to be optimistic about offshore wind as we head into next year, 2024?
Yeah, first, I guess I'll just start by saying, you know, indeed, they're challenging times, and that's no doubt, but that's not unique to offshore wind, right? And, you know, not to be cute about it, but that's happening throughout our economy, right, from an infrastructure standpoint. So inflation, you know, COVID, et cetera. So it's a universal impact, and we happen to be growing an industry from scratch in the U.S. simultaneous with what's going on in the macro, you know, the macro economic viewpoint right now. So that, first and foremost, I think we have to take these questions into the context of which, you know, we're all living today. Any other infrastructure project faces the same challenges, whether it be energy or building a new bridge, which apparently we need now in Rhode Island. So I think let's be mindful of that. In terms of optimism, you know, you heard it, right? These things are happening. Yes, they take a long time, and they are complicated, but they are very complicated projects. They're, you know, $5, $7, $8 billion infrastructure projects that have community benefit agreements, jobs, all sorts of supply chain agreements. We are starting an industry from scratch here in the U.S. Yes, it's a little bit similar to other renewables and land-based wind, but it is very, very different. And that is going to take a while. And I think, you know, we have to exercise some patience and understand the commercial dynamics and the policy dynamics associated with it. And we are seeing progress. There will be steps forward, steps backwards, every step of the way, and that will continue, I expect, for the next decade. But there is positive news. Yeah, South Fork, I think it's great that New York got interconnected. Yeah, they beat Massachusetts by 3 weeks. That's fine. A project is interconnected and flowing power into New York ISO. That's a great thing. We'll be next. There'll be other ones coming soon. So I think that's important to, you know, keep in mind that progress in another state is actually helpful to Massachusetts as well.
Great. Ken, you already touched on some of the things that you're optimistic about.
Sure.
Workforce being one of them, that you know, even despite the delays and some of the other news and talk, that there are people who are working on these projects who are bringing paychecks home to their families. Mm-hmm. So this, I get the sense from you that you look at this as a much bigger picture than this project or this industry.
I do. Let's take a step back a little bit, and I'm going to politely push back on the premise of your question. I actually think that when historians look back at the years 2022 and 2023, the punchline is going to be we started the offshore wind industry, in fact, by building projects, in fact, and through a combination of private sector and public sector leadership, we have overcome a very serious challenge. So let me unpack that a little bit. We've already talked about the Vineyard Wind 1 project. I just want to say we do not think we're competing against Ørsted for who's going to build the first project. I don't think Massachusetts is competing against New York. We're all competing against climate change. We're all in this together. It does not matter who, you know, flips the switch first. What matters is we're moving in the direction to deal with this problem.
Could I also push back
Sure.
on you in that then? Then if that's the case, Vineyard Wind for years now has made a very big deal about being first.
Yeah.
So it seemed like it was important until it was no longer the case.
Well, one can quibble. We're still the first large-scale offshore wind farm. But my point is, no one is going to care in 10 years who flipped the switch first. What's going to matter is, did we collectively take on humanity's biggest challenge? And did we offer a solution for that? And the answer is going to be yes. So personally, I can't find it in myself to get too concerned about who flips the switch first. It doesn't matter. But I want to make a second point that I think has been lost in some of the doom and gloom about offshore wind. So we faced this huge challenge in the end of 2021, start of 22, which is we were on this beautiful trend line of declining costs. And it looked like that was going to last forever. The price was going to keep going down. And lo and behold, reality crushed that assumption with the Russian invasion of Ukraine, with 5% interest rate increases, with the worst inflation of 40 years, unique supply chain bottlenecks. So here's how we all collectively responded to the challenge. First, our company and then others were honest and transparent about these realities, and we made it clear, and these were tough conversations, that we were not going to be able to go forward with projects that were bid and contracted for before this change happened. That wasn't easy, but we did it, and that took some leadership, and other companies did as well. And then what you see is the state leaders in Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island, New York, New Jersey, none of them threw up their hands and said, well, forget it, we're just not doing this. And they figured out a way to move forward, which is to use the power of competition to try to get us through this. And so you see New York accelerating the rebidding of these contracts that are no longer viable. That's what Massachusetts is doing, Connecticut, Rhode Island. And I would say that the 3 New England states have added an innovation to this, which is to collectively procure, which allows for large-scale projects, which allows for efficient sharing of resources to help drive down costs. There's also efforts to provide some indexing to the prices so that they can fluctuate depending upon what happens. So my real point is, leadership is not coasting along a pleasant trend line. Leadership is changing course when some challenge that you didn't expect confronts the enterprise. And I would say that from both the private sector response and the public sector response, we have shown leadership. We are moving out of the challenges that we faced, and we're righting this ship. And that's why I'm optimistic that we have the right set of private actors and public actors to pull this off. Will the price of offshore wind be higher? Yes, it will, and I know we're going to talk about that a little bit. But the fundamental reality of getting these projects built is not going to change. We need to do it, and we are going to do it.
Becky, your company has been in a somewhat similar situation where the whole world changed and that affected your projects. How are you thinking about the next year, the next couple of years, particularly in Massachusetts?
Absolutely. Just want to start by acknowledging it has been a rough year. The PPAs that we had, our team worked so hard to win them. I know the administration worked really hard to run that process. It's been painful. But Carrie, thank you for grounding us in the fact that the world has been tough over the past couple of years. Our challenges, while we spend all day in the weeds, they're not unique to us. So, take a minute and acknowledge that it has been rough. But the reason to be optimistic is that the fundamentals are sound. Nothing has changed in our ability to build these projects. We clear the runway. Climate change is still happening. Offshore wind can provide grid scale solutions to our decarbonization targets and goals. So we can do this, and I think the other thing that keeps me going and keeps me optimistic is that we don't have an alternative. This is our best available alternative, and we have to do this. And there's nothing to motivate folks to coalesce around solutions and to move things forward than having no great other alternatives. So we have the talent, we have the support in the Healy administration through Secretary Tepper's office and Commissioner Mahoney, who have had the foresight to carve a path to get projects who were experiencing the macroeconomic downturn back on track and to place us in a great position to compete again for PPAs and to get these projects built. So I'm optimistic because we have to be and because we can be.
Elizabeth, what's the view from outside of the industry looking in?
Yeah, well, I agree with a lot of what has been said, and I also echo Ken's sort of challenging the premise of the question here. I think there have been some really hard headlines. I mean, even the subtitle of this talk, can we surmount challenging economic conditions? Like, yes, we can. I think it's sort of how, and there's some really interesting questions there. The industry is not in a downfall; it's not collapsing. It is adjusting, and there's opportunities that we're seeing, silver linings in that adjustment, which I'd love to talk about later. I guess I'll say two things. I think the real bad news right now is about climate change. Yeah. I mean, that's the headlines about climate change are scary, and and there's no sugarcoating that. And I think offshore wind, like you said, Becky, is our single best and biggest tool to address climate here in New England. And there's so many bright spots. I was down in New Bedford a couple of weeks ago, and who's seen what's happening at the port, right? It is so beautiful. Like, it's bristling with all of this technology, all of these blades and nacelles getting ready to head out to sea, seeing the offshore substation rising up out of the ocean mist and seeing the turbines starting to turn is so exciting. It's also exciting to me to see Massachusetts becoming a real hub for ocean tech and the blue economy, with innovators and investors flooding here to try to help push us even further along. One of the things that I think is sort of confusing to people that are consuming news about offshore wind, which is a really complicated sector, is you see a contract being canceled, and it's easy to kind of think that means that the whole project is canceled. Like, it's easy to conflate a canceled contract with a canceled project. And I just want to reiterate that canceling a contract doesn't necessarily kill the project. It just means that you need to find a new contract or a different off-taker. The record of decision still stands. The environmental reviews and approvals still stand, and there are pathways for these projects to find new contracts.
Yeah, good point.
So let's kind of stay on that theme of the terminated contracts and projects finding new paths. So the state's going to accept bids in the latest RFP in January. What's going to be different this next time around? If I'm correct, I believe it's the state's fourth procurement. What's going to be different this time? And is there anything about this process that's going to help avoid the hurdles and the challenges that the industry ran into in previous procurements? Let's stay with you, Elizabeth. We'll head this way down the table.
Yeah, well, we're so excited about the tri-state procurement. I love that it creates sort of the fundamental conditions for states to be collaborating with each other instead of competing with each other, and rationalizing across the region things like workforce development and ports, supply chain infrastructure, and transmission. I love how it focuses us on the need to think in a strategic, long-term way about building out an interregional networked offshore wind grid to be really thoughtful about those points of interconnection to the points where we're making landfall, and that's going to have significant benefits for both ratepayers and marine ecosystems if we can be really thoughtful about that planning. We were really pleased to see the new indexing mechanisms in. Here, states are supporting indexing pricing in those bids to allow contract price changes when underlying economic factors change. I think that's terrific. We're not the first to do that, but we certainly celebrate that. So I think my developer colleagues probably have a lot to say about this, so I'll turn it to you.
Well, Elizabeth, you sure have a lot of great things to say. I was going to say a lot of the same things. First of all, Tri-State is a tremendous development. We're really excited about it. Again, sometimes competition is good. It drives down prices, but also sometimes it feels a bit like an arms race where you have an interest in developing your own assets, and collaboration. Sometimes it doesn't seem like the most advantageous pathway, but I think through the Tri-State, the states are leading and developing in an industry where there is more room for us to be talking across developers and antitrust rules intact. But developing solutions that serve ratepayers and serve states in a more meaningful way. So we're really excited about that. Of course, indexation mechanism. I think it's a really positive development that will protect us in the future. I would say we're looking for interest rates to be part of indexation mechanisms. When we think back about the past year, we look at supply chain and consumer pricing indexation, and that's a very positive development, but interest rates have been more than half the problem. So I think meaningful indexation mechanisms going forward, and there's lots of room for this to continue to evolve, should include interest rates. I think lastly, when we think about what's going to be different, I'll speak personally. We've had a couple of years now to further develop our projects. We know our project better, and we're better able to propose a competitive and deliverable project to the state that can deliver power by the end of the decade.
Excellent. And that I'm just going to add on sort of an addendum to my question. You took it upon yourself to answer it. Thank you. But as I turn to the other developers on our panel, I'm thinking back to the federal delay of Vineyard Wind, which ultimately allowed the project to reduce the number of monopiles, the number of turbines. Are there any opportunities like that this time around, where there's been innovation, or are there any opportunities to fine-tune those project details and not just the pricing details in this next forthcoming bid?
Well, just to respond to that specific question, project details really do impact the pricing details, right? How many turbines you have, what the array looks like, all those things are actually, any step of this, the permitting timeline, all those things are what impacts the price. So they're inseparable, I guess I would say. And maybe I'll just comment on your question. I think everything that you both said is spot on in terms of the forthcoming RFPs. As usual, I'll kind of be a little bit challenging on that. There are challenges with what we're looking at on January 31st. First, I'll say there are, multiple bids due on January 31st, which it's quite, can be difficult for developers from a resource standpoint to pull all that together in short order. We didn't receive some of the final RFPs until, the fourth quarter of this year. Not complaining about it, it's just, it can be challenging to really do this all at once, and particularly over a holiday period. From our perspective, it means, what we look forward to in January is that we all now have a lot of lessons learned, right? And it allows us to sharpen our pencils. We will provide credible, reliable, and competitive pricing, and that's really important for the process. What the outcome of that process is, I can't predict, but I know we're going into it with full understanding and full commitment on what we're submitting based on the context that we're given. And I think that's really important for the states. Second, on the state kind of collaboration, it is very helpful as we look into the future. It is still a little bit not exactly clear how all that's going to work out post January 31st. So yes, it is fantastic, and some of the things the Secretary referred to this morning about collaboration on transmission is really good as we look forward. But today, on December 14th, it's not all clear how that's all going to work. It's not written in stone that there has to be coordinated transmission, how they're going to pick the bids. And also I'll point out that while there is coordination across the states for the bid process on January 31st, those RFPs are unique into themselves. They are not the same RFPs. So Rhode Island's goals are a little bit different than Massachusetts. And we're mindful of that, and we want to reflect and respond to those asks from the states. They are different, though. So I guess I'll just point that out, that we look forward to it, but it's not a perfect package yet. We're still collectively working through how the states work together. What does that mean when it really comes down to it in terms of choosing projects, planning transmission, and those sorts of things?
Great. Hey, I hope you can sort of expand on that a little bit. I'm thinking about hearing a lot over the years from developers saying that they really want certainty or predictability.
Right.
How does working with 3 states sort of at the same time complicate that, or does it?
Yeah. Well, look, we're a fan of the multi-state process for the reasons I said earlier. I think it allows for larger scale and a pooling of resources. So not every state has to have, a maintenance facility or a marshaling port. You pool those resources, you drive costs down. It is complicated. We're pretty busy at work sorting through. You're right that the terms and conditions of the various power purchase agreements differ. So it's a little bit of a headache, but it's directionally so obviously correct. And given that we have 2 gigawatts of capacity to put in, we think the idea of the states taking portions of that capacity as they see fit makes a lot of sense, and it's worth any of the headaches that we're experiencing trying to cope with it. I do want to just, if I could, return to your original question. Please. How do we make sure that the thing that happened last time doesn't happen again? That was the question. And I think it's a good one, and I think the panelists have identified many of the reasons why it won't happen again. But again, I want to go back to what actually happened. We were on this downward cost curve, and it's kind of like human nature. When you're on a trend line, you just figure it's going to last forever. And we all do this in our lives. We all do. And that's what happened. So these projects were bid when we were all thinking costs were going to go down. No one really built in what was going to happen if the world changed. So we've learned that now. We've learned that. And what actually happened was such an extraordinary confluence of events. You had the Russian invasion of Ukraine, which shut down steel making, the specialty steel making that's used for offshore wind worldwide. You had 5 percentage point interest rate increase, which is extremely sharp. You had Europe pressing the accelerator pedal on offshore wind because they wanted to wean themselves off of Russian gas. And you had general inflation and the lingering effects of COVID, all at the same time. Now, I'm not saying that can't happen again, but it was a very rare moment in history, and I think we've all learned from it. The states have learned from it by putting indexing formulas in the RFPs. I think the developers have learned from it in terms of seeking out greater certainty about capital expenses and fluctuations. So we've learned that lesson. I really don't think this perfect storm is going to strike us again, and I don't think we're going to see a repeat. I think the bids are, as I said, the prices are going to be higher. They're going to include developers being certain that they can do those projects. We certainly don't want to go through what happened before. No way. We're not going to. So I think we've learned this lesson, and I think both on the public side and the private side, we have what's in place to make sure we don't repeat that story.
One quick point, which I think you'll agree with, is that the project that we're working on now, Vineyard Wind 1, which is about to be interconnected, has actually to date stuck to its contract terms. Yeah. And I know our intent is to continue to do that. So there, that was pre sort of, this stage. And it's a different landscape, and I think it's so important to understand that. A lot of people say, why can't we go back to, those prices? And I don't see us being able to do that. I also don't see the rest of the energy industry being able to do that either. So,
right.
Yeah.
Can I one quick thing? I think another thing that's going to carry the industry forward, we now know what the bad times were in the 2022-2023 period. I think we should all recognize that we don't know what the next bad time is going to be specifically. We can do our best, but something that we've learned and something that I think we can lean on is how industry and governments, the nonprofit sector, and all actors, the supply chain, all actors in offshore wind can come together to solve problems. I think speaking about the Healy-Driscoll administration, their reliance on preserving the integrity of the procurement system and getting us back into a solicitation, thinking about working across states so that prices, the tri-state, as we all know, allows states to share projects, to basically divide us up. But the thought is that could result in blended pricing, which sort of mitigates risk across the states and allows for the best prices shared across New England. So I think one big tool in the tool belt going forward is the ability to work together. We have experienced unprecedented times. I'm hoping we're moving back into precedented times, but we know that something else is coming, but our ability to work together is something that's going to carry us forward.
I want to stick on that theme of something else coming and ask Becky how you're thinking about or planning for the potential reelection of Donald Trump next year. Because we've seen what he thinks about wind. You know, we've seen what he's done to the wind industry in his one term as president. And that's a very real possibility that at this time next year, it'll be President-elect Trump. How are you thinking about that and preparing for it?
Thanks, Colin.
Wait, that wasn't on the list.
Yeah, I let the record reflect that we got some questions in advance. That wasn't one of them.
What can I say? I can't give all the goods away.
That's
you
fine.
know?
Yeah, well, that's a thought. Permitting. Permitting. We are laser focused on working with our federal partners and our state partners to progress our permitting as absolutely fast as we can. We have had great partnerships with BOEM and with the states to move forward. SouthCoast is making great progress. We had a really great night in Rhode Island on Tuesday that we'll see some news when they're ready on that. So things are moving. You know, I'll take this opportunity to just talk about the importance of permitting and collaboration. You know, Massachusetts has set up this new council to think about permitting in a comprehensive way, which very supportive of that. I think, you know, when we look in Rhode Island, we've experienced some issues at the EFSB, thinking about conflating the need, the definition of need as need for an off-take contract versus need for the energy. So that's something that we're watching and hoping that collectively as New England we can move forward on permitting so that when we look to the federal government and elections and how things may change there, we're able to mitigate risk.
Just a quick point on that, and I'd be interested in Elizabeth's comments on that too. When we develop projects, and Vineyard Offshore is very laser focused on this, we try to work with as many local stakeholders as possible across the spectrum, whether it be jobs, environmental organizations, workforce training, whatever it might be. And you'll see us all over the South Coast doing this right now and starting to do this in New York for other projects. I think this is related to your question on the election. Like, that's critical because we need a broad base of support that understands the depth and breadth of this industry and the benefits it brings across the board. It isn't just a kilowatt hour. It isn't just jobs. It's climate change. It's all these other things. And we, you know, at the basic level, work with stakeholders every day for all sorts of things to make these projects happen. And that will build the base to help us see through whatever political changes we anticipate. So, and I don't know, if you don't mind, it would be nice.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Biden administration's commitment to offshore wind has been outstanding. I mean, you've seen real interagency collaboration and a commitment to be bringing these resources online in a timely and responsible way. Speaking bluntly, I do think it will present challenges if that happens. That said, like, so much has changed in the last 4 years. You know, we're contemplating offshore wind development in the Gulf Coast in the southern part of the United States and in the Pacific, and you have red states and blue states seeing the potential promise of offshore wind. And so I think the politics are also different. And the last thing I'll say is that the federal government isn't procuring offshore wind. It's states that are doing it. It's still state policy that's directing utilities to enter into long-term PPAs. And so states remain the engine of leadership on offshore wind, and it will just be more incumbent upon us at the state level to be staying ahead.
Can I have one point?
Please do.
Yeah, I'm not going to opine generally on what the consequences of that electoral change would be. I will say that from our point of view, our 2 gigs of capacity are going to be federally permitted next year. So we have a little bit of a sigh of relief there. But I do think we have to be ready as a society for what would happen if the federal government decides to go a different direction on offshore wind. I am worried about all these stories that opponents of landings are doing about whale deaths and things like that. I am worried that a new administration could use that, for example, as an excuse.
There have already been ties
Yeah,
reported between.
yeah, right. to like do some kind of moratorium on federal permitting until this non-issue is investigated. So there is, I think we have to, as a state that wants to move offshore wind forward, we have to be thinking about how we would move forward, not so much for our projects, but for others that are in the permitting queue after 2024, how we would move forward. I am less worried, however, about changes in the tax incentives. The tax incentives are for offshore wind. They're also for onshore wind and solar and hydrogen and carbon capture and storage. I think they have broad support, and as Elizabeth pointed out, a lot of those tax credits, a lot of that money is going to red states. So I feel like that's in decent shape. I am worried, however, about what a president who doesn't want to permit offshore wind might do with his or her agencies to slow the progress down. And I think we've all got to start thinking about that now, not waiting to see what happens.
Well, as I was saying, I really think that's why stakeholders matter a lot,
Yeah.
and not just industry stakeholders. You know, our unions, our economic justice stakeholders. Everyone has to, everyone, I put that in quotes, see the benefits of what's coming for whatever reason, whether it be, clean energy or jobs in their area or innovation, technology. And it's really beholden on us to continue that effort this year, not just for our projects to get our project built, but also to ensure that we have a stable support through this potential change or any change.
Colin, can I just take while we're on politics for a minute? I think at the state level, polling time and time again shows overwhelming concern about climate change and overwhelming support for renewables. There was a 2022 poll that showed that 88% of voters want more solar, 86% want more wind. So at the state level, the decision for Governor Healy and the legislature to be ambitious on renewables in general and offshore wind in particular, that's not a political risk, I don't think. But Ken, your point about the really local stuff and the politics at the very local level is real. I am concerned about local elections and siting board votes to, if not derail, at least delay key infrastructure like cable landings and ports. And these siting issues are being turbocharged by misinformation and disinformation. I am troubled by the emerging picture of who's funding the kind of stuff that's swirling around in these communities. Just this week, some of you saw Brown University put out I see some nods, Brown University put out this map of where this disinformation is coming from, and it's kind of chilling to see that a lot of incumbent fossil fuel interests are actually funding the muck about, electromagnetic fields and whales being slaughtered. And developers are unfortunately not always the best messenger in these local communities because there is a perception of their own vested interests here. And so I think we all need to figure out how we effectively counter misinformation and also how we create trusted voices that can bring true and credible information to communities like Barnstable and Falmouth and Somerset who are really wrestling with this right now.
Ken, I know you've been particularly involved in Barnstable, where there's local opposition to a cable landing. You don't have to necessarily get specific to the details of that instance, but can you talk about how you approach those discussions with local communities and how you try to sort of get support from them?
Yeah, look, this is a big challenge, and we have projects all the way from Virginia all the way up the coast, and we're seeing kind of the same thing everywhere. But just to set the record straight on Barnstable, we have actually a very cooperative relationship with the town of Barnstable. They have shown great leadership. They are hosting the Vineyard Wind 1 project, which has landed. They are hosting, they've entered into a host community agreement for the 800 megawatts of our remaining 2 gigawatts. We're not discussing a host community agreement right now for the third project, but I hope we will. I'm not going to sugarcoat this one. This one is hard. What we're trying to do is to acknowledge that beach landings, underground cables are not injurious to safety or health, but they are a disturbance for the community. traffic patterns get disturbed. There's days that, there won't be parking spaces at the beach. So you got to acknowledge that there is a disruption. I think you have to offer communities real benefits in exchange for suffering through those disruptions. In Barnstable, we have a unique electric cable sewer line collaboration where the town is putting sewer lines in the roads that we're going to put duct bank work in. We try to coordinate the work so we don't rip up the roads twice. We take on a lot of those costs and save the town millions of dollars in costs, and we provide host community payments as well. I think there's more that we can do and should do on that front. So I think the thing is you can't go in and pretend that there's no impact. There is an impact. It's disruptive. You have to acknowledge it. You have to come up with a benefit that's being offered that mitigates for that. And then you have to, and Elizabeth is right, you really have to counter the misinformation that is spreading like wildfire. And I really do see the same talking points in Virginia that I'm seeing in Barnstable. And that is worrisome because we really can't be there 24/7 to counter everything. And what Elizabeth said is true. People in the town don't necessarily believe our experts, and we acknowledge that. So independent voices, independent experts is really important, and I think Elizabeth and ELM has showing leadership on that front. I think other voices need to come up as well. And I am worried about this because every group starts out by saying the same thing. They say, we're not against clean energy, we're in favor of clean energy, just not here. If every group gets their wish, it's not a NIMBY problem, it's a banana problem. Build absolutely nothing anywhere near anybody. And if that's where we end up with, we will not get these wind farms built. So we've got to deal with this issue, and it is a hard one.
That all, despite the high percentage of people who, at least in polls, say they want more of this energy, and then a small group in one place has the ability to at least delay that.
Can I just jump in on the disinformation point? So we work closely with some colleagues in New Jersey as well, which has been, they're on the front lines of the whale issue down there, and there's been some really interesting polling that's happened down there that has shown that the first voice that folks hear about offshore wind is the foundation for their views on offshore wind. And so Carrie, to your point about bringing in other stakeholders, and Elizabeth, to your point about voices, I think it is really incumbent upon the industry, and I'm not just talking about developers, but environmental groups, to be the ones that have that first conversation with actors who you might not necessarily think are natural constituencies for offshore wind, and to be the one to ground the conversation. And something else that we're thinking about really closely is how do we prepare young people to evaluate news stories and scientific information in the news? How do we provide that civic and sort of scientific inquiry lens so that when they see a story filled with disinformation about whales, they have something to fall back on. They know how to ask, what was the sample size, or what is the full trajectory, not just the past 6 months, or, when did this trend start? What's the correlation between all of that stuff, and that's something that I think we can support nonprofit organizations in doing and getting out there. But really, it's about having the conversation with folks who we might not necessarily think are the natural constituencies for wind, to demonstrate the importance of projects and what we're actually doing, so that when they get that disinformation, they have something to fall back on.
We this is very tactical, but it's very relevant for what we do. There's two pieces of it at the kind of even the ground level. One is our, Vineyard Offshore really tries to meet with every city and town or community that's impacted before we make a decision about where we think the best route is. Get the input from the state. Do you want this in your community? That is just as important, if not more important, than the electrical configuration of the grid of where it might be best to inject from an electrical standpoint. We didn't get to that stuff yet, but that's a whole, adds a lot of complexity as well. But does the community want, the project or the cable routing is kind of the first thing. And then the second thing is, again, very tactical, but I mean, I'm talking like we're physically present in the community with town halls, with employees that live in these communities, with, constant communication that is in part an educational thing about how to, discern what you're reading in a headline or in social media, but it's also really being in the community too, and being, you become a fabric as of the community, and that's also critical to the support. So I know this crowd, we're thinking we're more like policy type people, but there is a real tactical element to this of hiring people in the communities, having them be part of the community.
Excellent. Well, I've got a whole bunch of other questions here and ones that I also didn't put on the list, but I'm looking at the clock and it's time to get to the audience questions, and I'm sure all of you will have questions on the topics that we weren't able to get to because of time. So let's open it up. If anyone has questions, the panel would be happy to take them. I see Senator Barrett.
Thank you very much, Colin, and my thanks to all the panelists. This has been a terrific discussion. I sit on the Siting and Permitting Commission that was referenced by Secretary Tepper, and I'm struggling with a number of issues that have arisen there. What I'm hearing you folks say is that existing laws are tough, but a lot of engagement and a lot of community benefit and a lot of listening can overcome whatever obstruction opportunities exist for opponents when they use existing statutes. You're not asking to change any of those statutes, or you're not asking for consolidated permits that don't already exist in law. That's not the message the Siting and Permitting Commission is hearing. With respect to solar, we're told that one, or the implication is that one can't work through the strictures and demands of existing law. One needs effectively, instead to, and you can use whatever euphemism you want, consolidate, waive, but essentially we're being asked to suspend existing law in the interest of facilitating siting. So my question, writ large for clean energy, and this applies to offshore wind, solar, but also to electric infrastructure in general, is, are we talking about sensitivity and real engagement using the existing superstructure of law, or are we talking about an urgent need to suspend and consolidate, again, whatever euphemism you want to use, existing law? Which is the solution?
Ken, let's start with you.
Yeah, Senator, great question. I chaired a renewable energy siting reform commission many moons ago. The bill passed in both houses of the legislature, but at 2 minutes of midnight, someone added an emergency preamble, and the bill didn't actually become law. It's too bad, because it would have addressed some of the issues you're talking about. I think for offshore wind projects that are of a large scale, there is an energy facility siting board process that allows, if there is obstruction that prevents the project from going forward, the siting board has the authority to override. By the way, that's not a tactic that we as a developer choose to use, because we don't want to do that. We want to work things out amicably, but it's there. I would say about that process, however, it is very cumbersome and long. And there are, I think, things that could be done. I'm not sure they even need a statutory change. There could be regulatory changes to streamline that process a bit. I think it's very cumbersome, because you first have to do a 2-year plus a process to get the approval from the siting board. Then you go get your other permits, and if you have trouble, you can come back, but that's a long process. I think the problem you're talking about is a similar process does not exist for smaller scale solar and onshore wind, although there's not much of that these days. And so I would urge you to think about something akin to what the siting board offers for large scale projects like offshore wind, for smaller scale projects, which was the goal of that renewable energy bill about 10 years ago. It failed. I think that's worth taking another look and seeing if this remedy could be available for smaller projects too, because we need a lot of those projects also. It's not all just offshore wind.
Did you want to jump in?
Oh, Carrie, go ahead.
I was, I'm sitting with you on this commission, and we've met many hours, and the progress is slow. So, which is okay, but I would like to see more progress, I think. And I guess just, to reiterate what you said, early stakeholder engagement is very important, no matter what the regulation is or the law is. It's critical, and really it's beholden on the developer to do that. And to seek the support of the state and local community to help with that process. But you are right, early engagement is critical no matter what structure you have. I would say that we do need to think about the timing and the sequencing here in Massachusetts for siting, and improvements could be made. And that's what this commission is about, is trying to come up with those. So, yeah, it's really important, but the structure does matter too. So,
can I just jump in with a quick one? So, I think ELM's view is that our current siting and permitting processes are sort of failing us in two dimensions. They're not fast enough to accommodate the speed of the clean energy transition that we need, nor are they sufficiently inclusive of environmental justice voices. And we'll follow up with your office with our letter, Senator. But I just wanted to state we do very strongly support the Massachusetts Environmental Justice Legislative Table's proposal to make the Energy Facilities Siting Board more representative of environmental justice concerns.
Senator, nice to see you. We talked a little bit about this yesterday. Just to take a giant step back, I think the difference between offshore wind permitting and solar permitting, just to use a quick analogy, we're sort of on a cross-country course that's many miles long, and our solar colleagues are more on a track where they're doing a process over and over again and are experiencing any difficulties or hurdles repetitively, versus offshore wind, which it's a 5-year process, and so we are sort of very held tight to the overall process, the progress we've made, and what the little chunk that we have to do. I'm speaking specifically for SouthCoast Wind, so I would really love the opportunity to zoom way out as an industry and think about offshore wind permitting. It's just not something that, as we're sort of in the weeds on a day-to-day basis, I'll speak for SouthCoast when we've done quite yet, because we're so focused on the finish line. But I think as we start to get through the permitting process for these first projects and have a chance to look at the bigger industry and figure out where we can work together to improve, we'll have some great ideas.
I'm so sorry. I just want to add one quick comment for you, Senator, for everyone. We also need to think about this in connection with interconnection reform in not just Massachusetts, but elsewhere too. And that's a whole topic unto itself. But the sequencing of permitting and interconnection and how that's going to work, or how it hasn't worked, how it might work in the future, given reforms that are coming sort of from FERC with their new order and the implementation here in New England. But that's a challenge, not only for solar, but offshore wind. When you file for a queue position, when you get your studies done, that is related to permitting as well. And so there's this complex kind of sequencing that happens, but there's not a lot of collaboration across agencies or what have you to make that happen. So, big topic for another day, but.
Sounds like another event.
Yeah.
Do we have any other questions from the audience? Right in the center here.
President Foss, Offshore Wind, we're developing a Ullman terminal down in Bedford. We're also supporting DEMEG with the transportation of the turbines. Our vessels are doing transportation down there. I really appreciate the panel. You guys covered a lot of topics that keep me up at night. My investors keep me up at night. One of the topics we didn't cover that is really near and dear to my heart is fleet strategy. As you'll know, and it could be that developers are too far away from it, and we've spent a lot of time in the industry talking about turbine installation assets, and CCG was the two obvious ones, but there's about 25 or 30 other vessel types required to build an offshore wind farm and then maintain it. One of the issues that I'm really worried about, and one of the hidden costs that's buried in the variable costs that's buried in these bids when it comes around, is asset availability.
Yep.
And it's asset availability for a couple of different reasons. One, because in New England, we don't have an offshore construction anything, as you guys have mentioned. We have a nearshore fleet that's kind of one of these, and then we have an inland waterway, which creates the impression that we do maritime, but we don't.
We don't.
And then the issue then is, it's not well understood. States of Washington, Texas, Louisiana, these are at the state level. These states have a real sophistication when it the second variable is that as oil and gas increases, and right now the day rates for vessels in oil and gas are skyrocketing.
Yeah.
One of the other variables you guys didn't mention, but it's the same perfect storm.
Yeah.
Can't get assets. So if you get multiple projects happening on the East Coast, one, there's no availability, and two, if there were, the day rates are going to be well outside of what was ever bid. Sorry for the long preamble.
Yeah.
The question is there more that we can do as an industry to help the New England states or the Northeast get more sophisticated on offshore maritime strategy? Because as the turbines get bigger, the fleet that we're building is going to have to change radically. So I spend a lot of my time talking to people that want to invest in a new generation of assets for this or that. Easy for them to understand oil and gas. It's a very straightforward thing. They've been doing it for decades. They work with Texas. They work with Louisiana. Straightforward. Up here, the variables, the unions, the relationships aren't there. So it's a long question to ask you guys. Who should be setting maritime policy as it relates to long-term construction and O&M planning? And is that something that you expect a tier 2 like us to do, or a tier 1 that's a European company? They're not going to do it. Or is it the developer, or is it an unknown? So long question, but I think that marine aspect is super important. That's what I keep doing.
I'm not a maritime expert, but I will comment on this. First, I think you acknowledge a very significant issue. And if I understand correctly, some of the issues going on in New Jersey with Ørsted are related to vessel availability, and that has challenged their projects there. So to be clear for everyone, a vessel they were anticipating being available or had contracted for is not available and is put their project on hold. So it is a serious question to be asking ourselves. The second piece is, I'm just going to go back to what Secretary Tepper said this morning. I do think the states in New England and New York, and even as you get into the Mid-Atlantic, could be thinking about how to collaborate more and think about this strategically, because we're kind of small here. I mean, we think we're big, we're not really in terms of vessel demand, but with all this happening, we will be bigger. But I'm not involved enough to know, is there some plan out there that I don't know about? But her referral earlier to port and vessel collaboration, at least getting the states to think about what their needs are and trying to identify them on an aggregate basis could be beneficial. And then the third thing that we had asked a lot about is, what can the federal government do? And of course, there's constrictors on, what kind of vessel you can use and flagging and all that, which are really strict and will never change or probably never change. And one of the things that we, thought about more generally is just financing of vessels. If the federal government wants to help, maybe they can, offer more financing or cause them to be, constructed, at least as seed or what have you. So those are three initial thoughts. I know not quite on point, but yeah, I appreciate the question. It's a good one.
I would agree, Carrie, with everything you just said. But also, maritime issues, vessel availability, key to the offshore wind industry, but the problems there are not unique to those areas. It's something that's happening up and down the supply chain. So to just expand on your question, I think the key thing that moves us beyond this moment in terms of the supply chain and availability of all of the things that we need to build offshore wind are regular, predictable, and significant procurements by the states of offshore wind. It is the thing that will give the supply chain the certainty to expand and invest in what's needed and to really build the capacity necessary for an industry that's going to meet our decarbonization goals.
Yeah, well said. Great. Anyone else want to weigh in? Great. All right. Well, I think we're going to have to leave it here. There's still a lot more we can chew on at a future event, but I want to thank everyone for coming out this morning. I hope you learned something. I absolutely did up here with our panel. So I want to thank each of our panelists for participating, and thank you all for coming. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, Colin.